Welcome to the summer series of the Michael Yardney podcast. How are you going with your investing? Are you achieving what you're looking for? Today I'm going to be having a chat with Mark Creedon about what could be holding you back from being a more successful investor. You see, some people are just too biased to become successful. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, did you know we can sometimes be our own worst enemy as property investors? And it's not because of the decisions we make or the opportunities we consider or the investments we miss out on, but rather it's due to the way we think. Now, by last count, I read that there are 188 types of fallible mental shortcuts in existence, and we call these cognitive biases. I've written a lot about those before. You may have read them in my blog, or we've spoken about it on the podcast before too. But you see, as humans, as adults, we think we're rational. We think we're making rational, mature decisions when it comes to money and investing. But in fact, often it's not the case because of these cognitive biases. So, whether you're a beginning investor or an experienced investor, whether you're in business or an entrepreneur, I think you'll enjoy my chat today with Mark Creedon, founder of Mastermind Business Accelerator and CEO of the Metropole Property Group, as we're spending a little bit of time explaining why seemingly rational people act irrationally when it comes to money. Now, this is one of the last of my summer series of podcasts. Remember, normally during the year, we offer you 2 shows. In the month of January, we'll be giving you 3 shows, 1 new one a week, and 2 encore shows like this one that we recorded quite some time ago. But because there's so many new subscribers, and you've probably only gone back a little bit in the back episodes, here's one for you that I think is going to be very special. And if you've already listened to it, boy, it was a while ago, so I hope it's going to refresh your memory as we talk about what may be holding you back from being a more successful investor.
Welcome to the Michael Yardney podcast, where twice each week you will learn a number of new ideas regarding success, property investment, and money in around 30 minutes. Our show is brought to you by Metropole, who specialise in helping you grow, protect, and pass on your wealth through strategic property and wealth advice. Now, here's your host, Michael Yardney, Australia's authority in wealth creation through property, who has been voted one of Australia's top 50 most influential thought leaders.
Without always knowing it, property investors are pre-programmed with a range of biases that may cause them to interpret information incorrectly and somehow or other end up with suboptimal investment decisions. It's actually not just property investors. I see this as investors in general, business people, all of us. You see, most of us think we're rational. We're rational people when we're not. Now, there's no shortage of these, what we call cognitive biases out there to trip up our brains. Cognitive biases, they're patterns of thinking that don't rely on logic. They're a subconscious shortcut, an error in thinking that leads us to misinterpret information from the world around us. It affects the way we think rationally, the accuracy of our decisions. And as I said, they're unconscious and they're automatic, but they're designed to make our decision-making quicker and more efficient. And they convince us to spend more, to save less, to feel more confident about the decisions we're making when perhaps we shouldn't be. And the scary thing is they're unconscious. We're powerless against them. But because these things called cognitive biases allow your mind to get around the gaps in the knowledge and the memories you've got, you need to bypass them. So we're going to have a bit of a talk about that today with Mark Creedon, founder and CEO of Business Accelerator Mastermind. Hi, Mark.
Hello, Michael.
Now, Mark, I know you've studied psychology, so I'd like you to explain a bit more about what these biases are so we understand them, because they do get in our way of thinking rationally.
Yeah, they do. It takes me back to my old uni days, Michael. But I mean, broadly speaking, a bias is a tendency to lean in favour of or against either, a person, a group, an idea, but usually in a way that's unfair. The important thing to remember, Michael, is that biases are natural. They're a product of human nature. They don't simply exist in a vacuum or in our minds. They actually affect the way we make decisions. But you've spoken about cognitive biases. And what a cognitive bias is, The simple explanation is it's really a construction of reality. It's our construction. In other words, it's a subjective reality that we create from our objective input. And Michael, it's often a result of your brain's attempt to simplify information processing. I mean, we receive somewhere like 11 million bits of information per second.
Per second?
Per second. But you can only process 40 bits of information per second. So you have to rely on these shortcuts, and they help us make sense of the world with speed. And because of that, errors tend to arise from problems related to thinking, memory, attention, and other mental mistakes. And whilst cognitive biases can be beneficial because they don't require much mental effort and they can allow you to make decisions relatively quickly, but conscious bias, unconscious biases can also take the form of harmful prejudice that can cause problems for us, Michael.
Well, that's really what I wanted to discuss. I mean, clearly we got shortcuts. Every time I go to the door, I don't think about how I turn the handle. I've got to use this muscle. I've got to use that muscle. I've taken a mental shortcut and it just happens. You don't even realize you're doing it, do you, Mark?
I remember when I was teaching my daughter to drive, and she was learning in a manual, and when she came to a corner and had to put the indicator on, put the clutch in, all of these, turn the wheel all at once was just impossible. But you become automatic, as you say, in these things, and so in lots of thought processing that we do on a daily basis, Michael.
Well, let's discuss some of these because it's an area of interest that I've got, and I know we're going to be discussing this in detail at Wealth Retreat, because the thing is that we're going into these decision-making processes, often very expensive decision-making, whether it's buying an investment, starting a business, running the business of investments, and you're making them thinking that you're smart and you're rational based on the information you've got, when in fact it's not. And the common one I see is confirmation bias, where people tend to search for information that confirms the views of the world they already have and ignore what doesn't fit. Now, sure, a simple way of looking at it is Collingwood supporters think Carlton are no good and Carlton supporters have got all the arguments where Collingwood isn't any good, and much the same with Apple or Samsung when they're probably both the same. But I guess it's an uncertain world. We want to be right. We want to make sense of things. So we do this automatically, usually without realizing it. I guess it's partly easier because it's easier to see the things, the information you're getting, where it fits into the puzzle in your mind that you're already thinking about, rather than imagining a whole new picture, Mark.
Yeah, exactly. And so, Michael, you'll find that, people, for example, say in property, people will believe a particular type of property or a particular region will make for good investments. And so what they do is they then go about only seeking out that information, and they filter out everything that goes against that thinking. So it confirms what they believe, and they have a bias to looking for that confirming information.
So it actually prevents you looking objectively at an investment. Of course, it also has a factor when you've already bought something. Mark, it's so often that I get an email from somebody who I don't know, who reads my newsletter or listens to my podcast and says, hey, I bought a property in such and such an area. Is it a good investment? They've already made their decision. I guess they're looking for confirmation from an outside source as well. That's a different form of confirmation. And interestingly, the answer I usually give is, I don't know. They hate that answer. But the answer is an investment the right area, the right location, the right property? It really depends upon the person, their circumstances. So what's right for me isn't right for somebody else. I don't know in general, because they're not clients of ours, their circumstances, their cash flow, their risk profile, what other investments they've got. So it's actually not as much the investment, it's about the person. But I think one way investors can counter confirmation bias is to read things that they disagree with. It's not what you commonly do. You tend to ignore that, but read from reputable sources, of course, whether it's confirming your original views or not, Mark.
Yeah, that's right. And I think, Michael, it's also dangerous in business, isn't it? For example, if you surround yourself with people who are what we would call yes men or yes people, and all they're ever going to do is just confirm everything that you've said.
Yes, I understand, Mark.
Yeah, absolutely. And Michael, it's one of the reasons if I want to buy a new iPhone or a new car, I'm taking you with me because you'll confirm that it's a good idea for me.
Yeah. No, but the point you're making is, as a smart business person, that's exactly what you should not be doing.
Exactly. Yeah. So looking for reasons why your strategies might be wrong or reasons why your decisions might be wrong, as well as you say, looking for that reputable sources that have opinions that might disagree with yours. It'll just help minimize that confirmation bias.
Now, during booming times, all the media is saying the same thing. We've got a property boom. During the terrible times, they're all saying the same thing. But at times when the market's changing, like we're currently experiencing, you get mixed messages because there are different levels of certainty. There are uncertainties. So it's not surprising to get conflicting opinions. But be careful who you're listening to. Now, another bias that I know affects a lot of business people and investors and you and me when we go shopping is what's called anchoring bias. We've got a tendency to use anchors or reference points to make decisions, to make evaluations of what it's worth. And I remember a number of years ago, a long time now, it's been a while since I've actually parked in the Melbourne CBD, but I went for an early morning meeting and there was a car park there and it actually had a sign up saying $6 an hour. And I thought, gee, that's a lot. But then when I went to the next place, it actually said $10. And I thought that was more expensive because I'd already had that $6 put into my head. So I actually went back to the first car park. Interestingly, it was only $6, but not for the first hour. It was for the first 15 minutes or so. It was more per hour. But I'd had that figure already in my head. It made me make a decision. And I was at a 2-hour meeting. I think I paid $60, Mark.
Yeah, you almost want a share certificate rather than a receipt when you leave, don't you? Yeah,
Yes.
I think that the first number you see, if it's a price that comes up in negotiation, it colours anything that comes after. That's what happened to you in that parking experience, Michael. We see that people use that tool all the time. It can be a very valuable sales tool if you're using it. It can be a very dangerous sales tool if it's being used against you.
That's right. So salespeople know that high figures that they initially bring out anchor you to spend more. Property marketers, estate agents, car salespeople use this all the time. They start with a high asking price and then you feel good when you extract a discount from them. Over Christmas time, I bought a car and I thought, hey, I want a discount. They're not going to discount at the moment where cars are in short supply. And I got a discount and I felt good, but I still paid a lot of money, Mark.
Well, that might have been a bit of confirmation bias in there somewhere as well, I think.
That's right.
But, we see in white goods, Michael, if you walk into a white goods retailer, they'll have a price and it will say recommended retail and then it'll have a big line through it. So they're probably never going to charge you that price, but they've anchored your thinking into that price. Therefore, anything less than that suddenly becomes an amazing deal. And so you're far more likely to commit.
So as an investor, what you should remember is that it's natural for our brain to select an anchor or a shortcut around making decisions. And it's important to evaluate any property deal based on the fundamentals, on the numbers and figures and the information and the research you've done and your due diligence before you go there. I mean, auctioneers do that all the time. They'll say things like houses in this area tend to sell for over $1 million. And so they anchor the idea that this particular property is going to go for that price as well, even though that's not the words they've said, but that figure remains in your mind, Mark.
That's right. So if you pick it up for $975, you think you've scored yourself an absolute bargain.
That's right. So as we go through these cognitive biases, I think it's important for us to remember that we're doing this all the time. It's natural, it's subconscious, there's shortcuts our mind takes. And just by making people aware of it, we're helping them so that they don't get caught out. We are human. We're going to keep doing things irrationally, especially when it comes to money. Awareness bias is another one. How are your investments performing? Are you happy with the result of the investments you're getting at the moment? And interestingly, last year, even though the property market did well, if your property went up 10% per annum, but the general market over Australia did 20% plus, you're maybe not doing as well as you thought you did, and you may not even recognize it. In fact, it's been shown the poorest performers in all areas of our lives are the least aware of their own incompetence, not just in property, but I guess you see this in business as well, Mark.
Yeah, we do. Michael, what's the lacking the capacity to realize how badly a task is performing, or in fact, overestimating your ability is the Dunning-Kruger effect, isn't it? And we see that a lot in business.
It's been rudely said that dumb people are so dumb they don't realize they're dumb. But that's not what we're getting at, because we're not talking about smart people or dumb people. We just lack this awareness bias. So if you're the smartest person in your team, Mark, you're in trouble also. That's why we recommend people work with mentors. That's why I've got you as a business coach. It's in fact why quite a number of our clients do. I was really impressed a couple of days ago, we spent 3 days on the Gold Coast as part of Business Accelerator Mastermind program at the intensives, which, gee, wasn't it good to get back with people again?
Oh, it was fantastic to be face to face with people. This was a really good example, wasn't it, Michael? Because in that intensive, people actually got to sit around the room, to not have to be the smartest person in the room, to listen to advice from other people who'd been there, done it, and experienced it. And, I was thinking about that. It's actually not a bad thing to be terrible at something, either in business or investing or in life, and getting that expert advice. Is it? You can't be all knowing.
Well, if you're the smartest person in the room, you are in the wrong room. So as a property investor, you should consider getting independent strategic property advice at Metropole. Sure, we've got a vested interest in saying that, but it's not only to help you formulate your property strategy, one that we know is known, proven and trusted and is going to work through these challenging times because it stood the test of time, but also to help you annually review your property portfolio objectively, because we find that people, when they do it themselves, are too subjective. You've invested too much time, money, effort in buying that investment that you don't always see the downfalls, the shortcomings. And Mark, I think it's much the same in business. You need a business coach like you to see our blind spots and push us in the right direction.
Well, that's right. And one of the things that I got out of the intensive at the Gold Coast a couple of days ago, Michael, was watching people with different skill sets, different experiences. And even for you and I, we often talk about recruitment in your business is not your strong point. Calendar management is not my strong point. So we get other people who are good at that to do that for us. And we don't kid ourselves, which is what that bias is, that we're actually good at those things.
So the point of this little section is be careful of what's called awareness bias, because you're probably not seeing things as they really are. You're seeing them as you want to see them. Now, another bias is called positivity bias, and this is where many people view residential real estate positively, I guess, considering it's an asset class through which they can grow their wealth, and they continue to view it in this light, even if their investments don't work out, they fail to prosper in the face of lack of capital growth or prolonged vacancies or inflated expenses. We see them when they come to us after having purchased their property outside, and they sit with our property strategists and they say, oh, it's washing its face, it's going to do things one day, it'll turn the corner. The problem with this is that when all the signs point to a dud investment, the market's likely to be one, but positivity bias can stand in the way of an investor taking action to rectify the situation. It's that sunken cost that you spent the time, the effort, the emotion. You just want to look at it positively, maybe because if you don't, it suggests that you've made a mistake.
Well, that's right. And sometimes that's the biggest thing to have to admit. Michael, we see that in business too. And one of the most common areas I see it is with people who bring staff into their business and stick with somebody way longer than they should have because it's that sunken cost. They've sunk a certain amount of time, effort, blood, sweat, tears, money, whatever it may be, into a person. That positivity bias. Oh, look, they'll come good. Oh, look, they just need a little bit longer. Oh, I haven't put enough time in it. A whole string of excuses that stem from that positivity bias. But as you said, it stands in the way of them taking action to rectify the situation.
Well, one of the things I've seen business people do is actually add more staff, spend more time. I mean, we know resilience is important. We know it's an important criteria for business people, entrepreneurs and investors. So we're not saying give up, but sometimes you have to know when to say enough, don't you?
Well, you need to know when to change tack.
Yeah. So overconfidence is a real risk for property investors and for business people. And one of the best things an investor can do is admit what they don't know. And again, get a good team of people around them, because on your own, you can probably run faster, but with the right team, you can get a lot further. But interestingly, just as some investors can be overly positive, there's a tendency for others to emphasize the negative experiences rather than the positive ones. And that's what we call negativity bias, Mark.
Yeah. And people with this bias, Michael, it's just as dangerous as the positivity bias. It's I think psychologists argue that it's an evolutionary adaptation. I guess it's better to mistake a rock for a bear than a bear for a rock.
You did in the old days. Yes, you're right. Yes.
But this feeling that bad is stronger than good, they'll perceive threats more than opportunities. And so as a result, they miss a lot of the opportunities that come their way.
Well, I guess to keep our ancestors alive, Mother Nature evolved a brain for us that routinely tricked our ancestors into making three mistakes. They overestimated threats, they underestimated opportunities, and they underestimated the resources that they needed for dealing with threats or fulfilling opportunities. Now, obviously, it's a great way to pass on the genetics, the genes, but it's a lousy way to promote quality of life or grow your wealth through property or through business, Mark.
Yeah, it is, Michael. I worked with a CEO here in Brisbane a number of years ago, and he would start every sentence, every suggestion we made, every piece of coaching we gave, he would start the sentence as, well, look, the problem with that is. And so he would always look for the negative in it. And whilst he was, he was very, very good. Can I just say this? He was actually very, very good at finding the negatives. I mean, as a detective, he would have been brilliant. But as a business owner, his head was so full of the negatives that he failed to see the opportunities.
That's a real shame, Mark, because there will always be pessimists around. But I don't really know any rich pessimists. Optimists do much better in the world. There'll always be, in the property world, property pessimists, people saying, don't invest, don't invest now. Remember, things can go wrong. While the reality is that property investment's a cyclical investment, and there are good and bad times, or better times and worse times, but it really depends upon the person. But you can minimize your risks, you can maximize your upside if you educate yourself, if you become financially fluent, if you follow a proven strategy. And gee, it actually gets back to, I keep saying the same thing, Mark, but getting a good team around you, because you've got to deal with people who've got a different viewpoint. So if you're a negative type of person, it's actually much harder to enjoy the world.
Well, it is. And the other interesting thing, Michael, is that if you are a negative type of person, you're far more likely on your own to attract other negative people.
Yes, you would, wouldn't you?
Yeah.
Yeah. Now, status quo bias is another one. This describes our tendency to stick with what we know, whether it's the best course of action or not. It could be simply buying the same name brand groceries that you always have, or as complex as just holding the underperforming property. In the area of property, Mark, commentators are suggesting that staying with the same bank just because it's easy is costing people lots of money when interest rates could be different. But I think some people stick to what they know, but to avoid costs. But it's not worth doing that if it's actually going to minimize your risk of getting bigger gains. If the long-term growth prospect of buying a better investment rather than the one that you're holding, then the status quo bias is working against you. I guess it's a bit of loss aversion, isn't it?
Well, I think that's exactly what psychologists would call it, Michael. It explains why so many Australians are willing to stick their money in a bank account earning minimal or no interest, rather than taking what they see as a perceived risk of property investment, for example. It's interesting because most investment decisions actually have an alternative. One is to maintain the status quo and to do nothing.
Yeah, that's right. Or then to take action. But interestingly, I think the biggest risk is not to do something. Anyone who did almost anything in the area of property 2 years ago is sitting pretty, while those who have been waiting for everything to get perfect have missed out a great opportunity, a once in a generation boom. So in my mind, it's a bigger risk to waste the next decade sitting on the sidelines. Psychologists have shown us that most of us disproportionately stick with the status quo. Doing nothing is within the power of all men, somebody smart once said. And so we often weigh the opportunity of switching to the status quo, and we just imagine it's too difficult to do.
Yeah. I think one of the most dangerous things that you see, Michael, probably, in property investment, in entrepreneurship, in business, is that we've always done it this way.
Yeah,
I've always done this myself.
Yeah.
I've never got advice. We've always run things this way. Stopping that is exactly why you see successful investors, business people, entrepreneurs have mentors, coaches, and mastermind groups, Michael, because it, as you said before, it helps them see those blind spots, and it just calls into question, I know you've always done it this way, but is this still the right way? Is this still the best way?
Well, again, shamelessly giving a plug, that's what we do at Metropole, where we help our property investment clients build a strategic plan so that if they plan to become the person they plan to become, what ends up happening is they set their goals and then they do what they've got to do to achieve it. And we also teach them to plan for their plan, not to go to plan, because things go out of kilter, but at least they know which way they're heading. Yeah. We do that in wealth advisory as well, where Ken Race and the team put a wealth plan, creating lifetime and, in fact, intergenerational wealth. I know Business Accelerator Mastermind, similarly, you put a plan together for your clients.
Yeah, absolutely, Michael. And it is designed to challenge most of these biases, because we all experience, you and I experience these biases from time to time. Everybody experiences them. And so having somebody around you, having a group around you, mentors, team, coaches, actually helps you to challenge those in a way which can move you forward.
Well, I know that's part of the reason when you and I were planning what we're going to chat about today, we thought this is a really important topic to make people aware. So even if you're aware of these, and you've read about this, heard about this, listened to about this before, I guess what we're asking you to do is think, how does it affect me? How has it affected me? And how can I stop it affecting me in the future? And again, one way is to get mentors. And maybe it's a really good time to just have a really quick discussion about what you do to help business people, Mark.
Well, Michael, we work with service business owners and professionals in private practice. And what we do is we help them to build a business, not a job, what we call a level 3 business. The whole idea of it is to scale their business to the point where it is far less reliant on them. It's the old question: can you take 6 weeks off and there's as much or more money in the bank when you come back as when you left? And if the answer is no, then you don't really have a business. You might have a great job. So what we do in Business Accelerator Mastermind, working one-on-one with me, spending some group time with you, Michael, with Caroline, with some of our other faculty experts, and also with each other, which is something that was really important that came out of the intensive on the Gold Coast the other week.
Well, if you want to find out about my business coach, Mark Creedon, go to metropolmastermind.com.au. I'll leave us a link in the show notes. But if you go to the Metropol website, you'll actually just look for the Business Accelerator Mastermind link as well. But I think the interesting thing that I got at the Mastermind Intensive, which is the one-on-many group that we do 3 times a year. There's the one-on-many on Zoom, which is also very powerful, but not as powerful as the large group sessions, which is all included in the ongoing tuition. And there's one-on-one with you. There's a wide variety. But what reminded me was the breadth of business people, from pool shop owners to professionals to principals of multi-franchise car dealerships. And they all let their Superman capes go and just helped each other, which was great. So this is one way you can fight biases, by having other people around you. There's another one that's called bandwagon bias, which is the psychological phenomenon where people do something primarily because other people are doing it. The tendency is to align your beliefs and behaviors with the herd mentality. It's what happens to animals, but humans herd or stick together, I guess in the old days for safety. But just because everyone is doing things isn't necessarily right, Mark. In fact, in general, in business and general in investment, if everybody's doing it, it's more likely to be wrong.
Oh, Mike, I'm sure you've seen numerous investment fads and fashions come and go.
Investing in the United States, investing in New Zealand property, timeshare. You're old enough to remember timeshare.
I am old enough.
Mining towns, vendor finance, hotspots. Yes, and then people jump onto the latest fad and they get caught up in the hype, in the mistaken belief that if others are doing it, it must be a good investment. But as it turned out, the herd was wrong, Mark.
Yeah, and we've seen that time and again. And we see the same thing in business too, Michael. Sometimes people, they look at what else. It's good to look at what other people are doing, but it's not good to just look at what they're doing and follow it blindly. So sometimes you actually have to have in fact, you always have to have a point of difference. Otherwise, you're just competing, in the same marketplace for the same dollar, and that's just really hard work. So,
well, as I said, I found in investing, the herd is usually wrong, and the statistics prove that 50% of people who get in property investment give up after 5 years. They've sold up, and of those who stay in, most never get past more than 1 or 2 properties. So remember that great Warren Buffett quote: "Be fearful when others are greedy, and greedy when others are fearful." In fact, that's what's quoted regularly. The words he said were not exactly that, but that's what the principle was.
Yeah, exactly. It really is about aspiring to be unique, to be different, and not be part of that herd, Michael.
Sure. Well, there's two more biases I'd like to quickly discuss, and one is called restraint bias. And I understand this one because following on from bandwagon bias, restraint bias is the tendency for people to overestimate their ability to control impulsive behavior. Will you have that extra chocolate when you're watching your weight? Will you spend that extra hour on the internet when there are more important things to do? Mark, our life's full of temptations, and some of us are much better at resisting them than others.
Well, yeah, Michael, I mean, in psychology, we say that the very people who think that they are the most restrained are also the most likely to be impulsive.
Funny about that.
So is this where we don't talk about chocolates, Michael? Or?
No, let's leave that one out.
But you know, you would have seen, Michael, you would have seen property investors plan to hold on during flat years that occur every property cycle. You know, they know that real estate is a long-term investment. They might even have created a strategy or discussed a plan of attack to help guide their decisions under various circumstances. But then when the time arrives, panic kicks in. And suddenly they react like everybody else. They sell up, and they sell up at the wrong time, don't they?
Often near the bottom when all of a sudden the cycle turns and they miss out. It's like those people in the share market in March 2020 when the pandemic first hit and the share market dropped 20% and people sold up in a panic, even though their long-term plan was to hold those shares for decades for their retirement. I guess it's, again, being the smartest person in the room, you're in trouble. But if you have mentors, if you have professional advisors to look at your blind spots, having a strategic plan in place, then what you do is you just follow the plan. Because if you don't have a plan, you tend to default to what the media is saying, what your friends are telling you at the barbecues, Mark, rather than, okay, that's my plan, no reason to change.
Interestingly, Michael, during COVID, one of the sort of the catchwords at the start of COVID in business anyway was pivot. And you and I discussed how much we disliked that word. But if we look at the people that we've worked with in Mastermind who didn't pivot, who didn't suddenly stop selling travel and start selling ice creams, or just they stuck to the plan, their long-term plan is now coming to fruition because they've taken that strategy, they've stuck with it, they've persevered, and they knew that it was going to be a long game.
But it was hard for them because they were so stuck in the middle of it. And I know your good advice made a big difference to them. Okay, the last one I want to discuss is bias. And this is failing to recognize the cognitive biases are a bias in itself. I guess what I'm getting at is if you've been listening to Mark and me for the last half an hour and you found this a very interesting intellectual exercise and you didn't realize that we're talking about you, then you've got bias. Exactly.
But isn't it true? Because as a coach, and I've said this to you lots of times, one of the things I hear clients say the most is, I know that. I know that. And there may be people listening to this going, yes, I know that. I understand the Dunning-Kruger effect. I understand, confirmation bias. I understand all that. But what are you doing with it? How is it affecting you? And how objectively are you looking at that?
Well, I guess if you think you are more objective than you really are, and many of us are that way, you're at the risk of bias. In reality, we all come into investing or business with our own predispositions, our own ideas, things that we've heard about, things that we feel are right. And that means we are prone to errors of judgment. So the sooner you realize and acknowledge these tendencies in yourself, the more open you're going to be able to improve things, to make better decisions, Mark.
Yeah, and Michael, simply becoming aware of these biases, I think, sort of means that half the battle against your own worst enemy, which we know is yourself, is actually won. I mean, we all like to think that we're rational, and we're all probably good at seeing the biases in other people, Michael.
Yeah. However, I think it's because our brains are designed with blind spots. It's a protective mechanism. It's one of the clever tricks to just being a little bit deluded that we don't even have any of these biases. And that's why so many Australians, actually so many people around the world, are bad with money. And the other thing is they actually keep making the same mistakes over and over again because we're blind to our blindness.
Yeah.
So I actually had fun with our chat today, but I always enjoy these. So we'll be back again in a couple of weeks to have another chat. But if you want to find out more about Mark's Business Accelerator Mastermind, and I'm actually his business partner in that, so I've got to be transparent about it, but I know how much it's helped us and a lot of our clients, and so I'd recommend you go to metropolemastermind.com.au and explore, have a chat with Mark, see if he could help you as well if you're in a small business or a professional. And of course, in the arena of property, if you want some clarity and direction about all the changing markets, why not go to metropol.com.au and have a chat with one of our property strategists. Thanks for your time today, Mark.
Always good fun, Michael.
Well, I hope you enjoyed my chat with Mark. Now, the theme of the Michael Yardney podcast is helping you increase your competence in property investment, but also having success, money, more financial fluency and literacy. And so we don't just talk about where the property market's going or what's going to happen to interest rates, but we also talk about the psychology of success, which is, I guess, what we were having a chat about today. And if you got some benefit from it, if you learned about some of the things that may be affecting your decisions, why not tell somebody else about the Michael Yardney podcast? I'd like you to help me in my quest to help as many people as possible become financially fluent. So just tell one person about the Michael Yardney podcast, or of course you can tell the world wherever you listen to this podcast by leaving a review. And I'll be back again real soon, but you can catch me in between these podcasts on social media. Just look for Michael Yardney, or my private Facebook group if you just go to Facebook and look for the Property Update Facebook group. I'll be back again real soon. In the meantime, have a great week. Make it a great week.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Michael Yardney podcast, which was brought to you by Metropol, who help their clients grow, protect, and pass on their wealth through strategic property and wealth advice. If you like what you heard and don't already subscribe, you'll find us on iTunes or on your favorite Android app as the Michael Yardney podcast. Watch out for our next show, which comes to you twice a week, and you'll learn some new ideas about property investment, success, and money in around 30 minutes. To get more of Michael's thoughts, go across to www.propertyupdate.com.au and sign up for his daily morning briefing, and you'll hear from not only Michael, but a group of leading property success and money experts. And just a reminder that the information you heard in this show today is general educational advice and not specific investment advice, as we don't know your personal circumstances. If you're looking for specific advice, why not ask the team at Metropol to help you?